It happened on a warm summer afternoon, on a quiet neighborhood street where nothing extraordinary had happened in years. No television cameras, no concert stage, no flashing lights, no security barricades. Just ordinary families living ordinary lives. Until the impossible arrived. The neighborhood had settled into its familiar rhythm. Children chased bicycles along cracked sidewalks. Elderly neighbors rocked gently on their porches while discussing the weather. A gardener trimmed bright rose bushes beside a white wooden fence. Somewhere in the distance, a radio softly played an old country tune, while the scent of freshly cut grass floated through the warm air. Everything felt peaceful, predictable, forgettable. Then, the deep rumble of a classic Cadillac echoed through the street. Heads slowly turned. The shiny vintage car rolled forward at an almost respectful pace, its polished chrome reflecting the golden afternoon sunlight. The engine stopped. Silence followed. Nobody recognized the car at first. Then the driver's door slowly opened. A polished black shoe touched the pavement. Another step followed. A tall figure emerged wearing a crisp white shirt with rolled sleeves, dark trousers, polished leather boots, and unmistakable black hair that shimmered beneath the summer sun. Someone gasped. Another neighbor dropped an armful of groceries onto the sidewalk. One little girl froze with her skipping rope hanging motionless in the air. An elderly man removed his glasses, wiped them carefully, and stared again. It can't be. No. It is. It's Elvis Presley. Within seconds, whispers spread from porch to porch faster than the wind itself. Elvis? The Elvis? What is he doing here? Doors opened across the neighborhood. Curtains moved. Windows slid upward. People stepped outside, unable to believe what they were seeing. Children abandoned their games and sprinted toward the street. Teenagers nearly screamed with excitement. Mothers grabbed their cameras. Fathers stood frozen in disbelief. Everyone expected the same thing. An autograph, a photograph, a smile, a wave. After all, that was what celebrities usually did. But Elvis Presley did something no one expected. He never looked at the crowd, not even once. Instead, his eyes slowly searched the quiet street with unusual concentration. Not hurried, not distracted, intentional. Almost as if every step had already been planned long before he arrived. He held several brightly colored balloons in one hand. Red, blue, yellow, green, purple. The balloons danced gently in the warm breeze, creating a strangely beautiful contrast against his calm expression. People exchanged confused glances. What is he looking for? Is someone important here? Maybe a politician? A famous family? Nobody knew. Then, his eyes stopped. Across the street, standing beside an old mailbox, was a little boy, perhaps 7 years old, small, thin, wearing faded blue overalls and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His smile was shy, almost uncertain. Unlike every other child rushing toward Elvis, this boy never moved. He simply stood there quietly, holding a small toy airplane with chipped paint. For a brief moment, the entire neighborhood disappeared. The cheering faded, the whispers vanished. It was as though only two people remained in the world, the king and one forgotten little boy. Without saying a word, Elvis began walking toward him. Not quickly, slowly, carefully. Every step carried an almost indescribable gentleness. The crowd instinctively parted to let him pass. Nobody dared interrupt. Something about the moment felt sacred. A teenage boy raised a camera, then slowly lowered it again. Somehow, taking a picture suddenly felt inappropriate. The closer Elvis came, the more obvious something unusual became. The little boy wasn't smiling the way excited children usually smiled.
There was happiness in his face, but there was also exhaustion. His tiny shoulders seemed too weak for someone his age. His skin looked unusually pale beneath the sunlight. Yet his eyes sparkled brighter than anyone else's. Elvis stopped only a few feet away. The balloons floated gently above them. The little boy looked up with enormous eyes. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Mr. Presley." Elvis smiled. Not the famous stage smile millions recognized around the world. This one was softer, warmer, real. He slowly lowered himself onto one knee until they were eye to eye. "Hello there, partner." The little boy's hands trembled. I didn't think you'd really come." The words landed like a quiet mystery. Several nearby neighbors exchanged puzzled looks. Come? What did he mean? Had they met before? Elvis simply nodded. "I told someone I would." Nobody understood. Not yet. A woman standing nearby chuckled softly. "This must be another publicity event." Another man shrugged. "Probably filming something." Someone else laughed. Only Elvis would drive all the way here just to hand out balloons. The comments drifted through the warm air. Elvis heard every single one. Yet he never reacted. Not with anger, not with annoyance. His entire attention remained fixed on the little boy, as though every other voice belonged to another world. He extended the colorful balloons. "I think these belong to you." The boy reached forward with shaking hands. The strings slipped into his tiny fingers. For the first time all afternoon, he laughed. Not politely, not nervously. It was pure, bright. The kind of laughter that seemed powerful enough to chase sadness away from the entire street. Neighbors smiled instinctively. Several mothers quietly wiped away unexpected tears. Children laughed simply because the little boy was laughing. Even strangers smiled without realizing it. For one beautiful moment, the whole neighborhood felt lighter. Hope seemed to drift upward with the balloons. But then, everything changed. Elvis noticed someone standing just behind the child. His mother. She hadn't spoken a single word. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't taking photographs like everyone else. Instead, she stood perfectly still with trembling hands pressed together. Tears silently rolled down her cheeks. Not dramatic tears, not loud sobs. Just the kind of tears a mother cries when she has been carrying unbearable pain for far too long. Elvis slowly looked from her face back to the little boy. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. His eyes drifted downward. That was when he saw it. Wrapped around the child's fragile wrist, partially hidden beneath the sleeve, was a thin white hospital identification bracelet. Time seemed to stop. The laughter faded. The balloons still floated gently overhead, but suddenly they no longer looked playful. Elvis stared at the bracelet. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. The smile disappeared. His eyes softened. His heart already understood.
even before anyone said a single word. The mother noticed where he was looking. She quietly lowered her head, unable to hide the truth any longer. Elvis rose slowly to his feet. He looked at her gently, without speaking, without asking. She understood. Taking a slow breath, she finally whispered the words she had prayed she would never have to say aloud. And in that single quiet sentence, everything Elvis Presley had planned for that day was about to change forever. The mother could barely find the strength to speak. Her fingers trembled as she gently reached for her son's shoulder, holding him close, as though she feared the world itself might take him away. For several long seconds, no one said a word. Even the children who had been laughing only moments before stood strangely still, sensing that something far more important than excitement was unfolding before their eyes. Finally, the woman looked into Elvis's eyes.
"They told us," she whispered, her voice breaking, "that he doesn't have much time left." The words hung in the warm summer air like an invisible weight. Elvis didn't blink. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened. "The doctors have tried everything." She swallowed hard. "They said there isn't another treatment they can offer." Her voice cracked. "They told us to take him home, so he could spend whatever time he has left with the people who love him." Around them, neighbors quietly lowered their heads. The cheerful atmosphere that had filled the street only minutes earlier disappeared completely. The little boy looked down at the colorful balloons in his hand. He wasn't crying. He had cried enough already. Instead, he smiled softly, as if he had accepted something no child should ever have to understand. Elvis slowly knelt beside him again. "What is your name, partner?" The little boy smiled. "My name is Tommy." "That's a strong name." Tommy nodded proudly. "My dad picked it." Elvis glanced toward the mother. She quietly whispered, "He passed away 2 years ago." Another silence. He understood. This family had already survived more pain than most people would face in an entire lifetime. Elvis looked back at Tommy. "So," he smiled gently, "I heard you wanted to meet me." Tommy's face lit up. "It was my biggest dream." "Really?" The boy nodded so quickly that the balloons bounced above his head. "I've listened to your records every night. My mom says I know all your songs. I even tried to copy your hair." The neighborhood chuckled softly through tears. Tommy laughed too. "I couldn't make it work." Elvis laughed with him. "I spent years trying to make it work too." For the first time since the heartbreaking conversation began, everyone smiled. But then Tommy quietly asked a question that seemed to stop time itself. "Mr. Presley, do you think heaven has music?" The entire street froze. No one expected those words. The neighbors stared silently. Some covered their mouths. Others immediately looked away, unable to hide their tears. Elvis remained perfectly still. He looked into Tommy's innocent eyes that weren't afraid of dying, only curious about what came next. Elvis gently placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "I believe," he paused, "that wherever love exists, music follows." Tommy smiled. "Then maybe I'll hear you sing there someday." The words struck every heart on the street. Even the strongest men quietly wiped away tears. Elvis looked away for only a second. He needed that second, because if he had continued looking into Tommy's eyes, He wasn't sure he could stop himself from crying. Instead, he slowly stood. Without saying another word, he walked back toward his Cadillac. The crowd exchanged confused looks. Some whispered, "Is he leaving? Did he come all this way just for this?" Others looked disappointed. The little boy lowered his head. For just one brief moment, his smile faded. Then, the Cadillac door opened. Not for Elvis to climb inside, but because he reached into the back seat. A few seconds later, he returned, carrying something wrapped inside a worn leather case. His guitar. The same instrument that had helped create unforgettable memories for millions of people around the world. He slowly removed it.
The polished wood caught the golden sunlight. He adjusted the strap over his shoulder. Without microphones, without speakers, without a stage, without an audience that had paid a single dollar. Elvis Presley stood in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood street. He looked only at Tommy. This concert, he smiled warmly, is for an audience of one. No one breathed. His fingers gently touched the strings. The first chord floated through the warm afternoon air, soft, gentle, almost like a prayer. The neighborhood became impossibly quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause. Every note carried something words never could. Hope, kindness, compassion, love. Tommy closed his eyes. The balloons danced gently beside him as the music surrounded the little street. He wasn't standing in front of a hospital anymore. He wasn't thinking about doctors or medicine or fear. For those precious moments, he was simply a little boy listening to his hero sing only for him. Children sat quietly on the sidewalks. Parents wrapped their arms around one another. An elderly veteran removed his hat and held it against his chest. A young mother silently rocked her sleeping baby while tears rolled down her face. People who had argued for years stood side by side without saying a word. Neighbors who barely knew each other's names suddenly felt like family. The music transformed the street. It wasn't simply a performance. It became something much greater. A reminder that sometimes the greatest stages are not built beneath bright lights. Sometimes they are found exactly where someone needs hope the most. When the first song ended, nobody applauded. Nobody wanted to break the silence. Tommy simply whispered, "Could you sing one more?" Elvis smiled. "I'll sing as many as you want." So he did. One song became two. Two became three. The afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Golden sunlight turned orange. Orange slowly became soft amber. People forgot about dinner, forgot about appointments, forgot about time itself. Nothing mattered except the music, except the little boy whose smile seemed brighter with every passing minute. When the final note finally faded into the evening sky, Tommy quietly walked forward. He wrapped his tiny arms around Elvis. "Thank you." Elvis hugged him tightly. "No, partner." His voice barely escaped above a whisper. "Thank you." Then, while everyone was watching Tommy, Elvis quietly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed a small, cream-colored envelope. Without attracting attention, he gently placed it into Tommy's mother's trembling hands. He leaned closer and whispered only one sentence. "Please don't open it until I've gone." The mother looked confused. Before she could respond, Elvis simply smiled. He tipped his head politely toward the neighbors, placed his guitar back inside the Cadillac, started the engine,
and slowly drove away.
The street remained completely silent, watching the legendary car disappear beyond the end of the road. No one knew that inside the small envelope resting in the mother's shaking hands was something that would change their lives forever. The sound of the Cadillac engine slowly faded into the distance. No one moved. For a long moment, the entire neighborhood remained frozen, as if everyone feared that taking a single step might somehow break the beauty of what they had just witnessed. The balloons drifted gently above Tommy's head. The guitar had fallen silent. The golden evening sun painted the quiet street in shades of amber and gold. Tommy looked toward the end of the road where the car had disappeared. He smiled. "Mom, I'll never forget today." His mother couldn't answer. Her throat tightened with emotion. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him and held him close, fighting back tears that refused to stop falling. Then she remembered. The envelope, still resting in her trembling hands. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked around at the neighbors who were watching quietly. With careful fingers, she broke the seal. Inside was a folded, handwritten letter. Beneath it, a bank check. She unfolded the check first. The moment her eyes saw the amount, her knees nearly gave way. A neighbor caught her before she collapsed. "What happened?" She couldn't speak. She simply handed him the check. His eyes widened. Within seconds, the paper passed from one pair of trembling hands to another. Every person who read it reacted exactly the same way. Complete silence. The amount was enough to cover every hospital bill, every specialist, every treatment, every medication, every expense the family could never have imagined paying on their own. There were no conditions, no publicity contract, no request for photographs, no demand that anyone tell the newspapers. Just quiet generosity. Then Tommy's mother unfolded the letter. The handwriting was simple, steady, personal. She read it aloud through tears. "Dear Tommy, I have sung in front of millions of people. I have stood beneath the brightest lights and heard crowds louder than thunder. But today, I sang for the audience that mattered most." Never measure your life by the number of days you are given. Measure it by the number of hearts you touch. And today, young man, you touched mine. Every child deserves to know what hope feels like. Let me take care of the rest. With love, Elvis. No one spoke. Several neighbors openly cried. Even those who had whispered that Elvis was only there for publicity lowered their heads in shame. One elderly man quietly removed his hat. "I judged him before I knew him." Another neighbor whispered, "So did I." Tommy looked up at his mother. "Does this mean we can go back to the hospital?" She knelt beside him. For the first time in many months, the tears on her face were not tears of despair. They were tears of hope. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going back." That very week, doctors resumed treatments that had once seemed impossible because of the overwhelming financial burden. New specialists reviewed Tommy's case. New medicines became available. New opportunities appeared. No one promised a miracle. Medicine could not make such promises. But something else had changed. Tommy no longer felt alone. Every nurse in the hospital had heard about the neighborhood concert. Children in nearby rooms began asking about the boy Elvis sang to. Letters started arriving. Some contained drawings, some contained prayers,
Others contained words of encouragement from complete strangers. One act of kindness had inspired hundreds more. Months passed. Tommy grew stronger. Some days were difficult. Some days brought setbacks. But every time fear returned, he looked at the colorful balloons, carefully preserved in photographs, and reread Elvis's letter. It reminded him that someone he admired believed he was worth fighting for. Years went by. The balloons were long gone. The music had faded into memory. The handwritten letter became worn from being opened so many times. Tommy eventually grew into a young man, healthy enough to chase dreams that once seemed impossible. Instead of forgetting what had happened, he chose to honor it. He dedicated his life to helping seriously ill children and their families, making sure no child facing fear ever felt abandoned. Whenever people asked what inspired him, he smiled. I met a man who taught me that the greatest gift isn't fame. It's showing up when someone needs you most. He never measured that day by the songs that had been sung, or by the balloons, or even by the check. He measured it by the feeling that someone had looked at him not as a patient, not as a tragedy, but simply as a little boy deserving of joy. Long after Elvis Presley was gone, the story continued to live. Parents told it to their children. Neighbors shared it with newcomers. Teachers repeated it in classrooms, not because it was about a legendary singer, but because it was about the quiet power of compassion. People often believe legends are created inside packed stadiums, under dazzling lights, with roaring applause echoing through the night. But sometimes, the greatest legend is born on an ordinary street, on a warm summer afternoon, when one man chooses to stop for one forgotten child. That day, Elvis didn't simply hand a little boy a bundle of colorful balloons. He gave him hope. He gave his mother strength. He reminded an entire neighborhood that kindness can echo farther than any song. And although the concert lasted only a short while, its melody continued to play in people's hearts for the rest of their lives. Because long after applause fades, long after balloons disappear into the sky, long after songs become memories, a single act of genuine kindness can become immortal.